So this is Illegitimate Scholar 45, Cultural Anthropology, Dissident History, Historiography. This week it's a conversation with a close friend of mine, Jewish American guy. We talk about Israel Palestine in a frank way. Next week I'll have a more traditional Illegitimate Scholar anthropology. We're going to talk about the culture of obesity in America and what's wrong with it. So, stay tuned for that. I'm going to be in Gulf Shores, Alabama for the next 9 days, leading to a documentary that I've been working on. So if you're in that area, let me know. So this is Illegitimate Scholar 45. I'm probably going to record another intro on top of this. But I'm sitting here with a Jewish guy, and we're going to talk about Israel Palestine.
Just a Jew.
So let's talk about why you support Hamas.
I support Hamas because... No, I can't even think of a joke, honestly, because I'm just... Yeah, I mean, I came here because I texted you the other day, and this whole thing is just... sucks, man. This conflict.
It sucks. Yeah, that's a great understatement.
Yeah.
It sucks that there's a giant ethnic conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about it as a Jew? As a J-O-O?
As a J, I have... my stance to you for a while before this thing kicked off was that I do consider myself to be a Zionist in the traditional sense of the word, right?
Well, Zionism, let's just define that really quick. When we're saying Zionism, you're saying that you believe that Jewish people should have an ethno-state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And have the right to defend it.
Fair enough.
And that's where my pro-Zionist views really end.
Yeah.
Where that word has been sort of perverted to mean. A lot of people use Zionist as like borderline slurred to mean you believe that Israel has the right to do whatever it wants without impunity against Palestinians and other groups.
Yeah, but there's this thing, right, in like when you're talking about Israel and Palestine, regardless of it, is that like there is a implication, and I legitimately from both sides, that's like it's mutually exclusive in the sense that you will be like ultimately taken to the extremes, the idea that there is a Jewish homeland, Israel, and that it's on top of all the same territory that the Palestinians are on. It's inherent genocide to me. And then the same perspective from the Palestinians who are like Israel, like river to the sea. The implication of the phrase river to the sea is like all the Jewish people need to get out. The Israelis need to get out, right? So it's the same thing from the other side.
I don't see how the existence of the Israeli state is inherent genocide in any way.
No, what I'm saying is that like the existence and perception of the Israeli state as, again, it from the river to the sea, essentially, is the Israelis don't say that, but that is, I mean, that's kind of what it is.
So you're saying
right?
The implication of
the implication
pro-Zionism stance is that Israel deserves all of the land of Palestine, or
and it's like practically, and this is something I talk about a lot.
Practically over time, Israel has absolutely grabbed land from
over time. Israel's land has increased
completely,
and
absolutely.
Yeah. There's treaties that they would have had before that the Arabs didn't take, and that's used as an excuse for later. And
I mean,
but what angle do we want to take on this?
Nothing. There's no angle. I don't.
No, I know. I mean,
my
angle of like what specific thing we're going to talk about.
It's rough because I do see Israel as an illegitimate state and should be, dissolved as like a genocidal stance. That is, that would result in the darkest time in Jewish history since the Holocaust, undoubtedly.
Right, because there would be a removal
at the mercy of Hamas, realistically, right?
Right, which is
we've seen how that played out.
Yeah.
So that's a stance that I refuse to accept. And, a weird counter argument to that some people make is the war crimes that the current Israeli administration, commits and all the horrific acts that they've done, right? And I don't see that as a validating condition for the dissolution of Israel. Like, well, you can oppose the current regime, right? If you want to put it that way, which I don't. I do think that Israel's been definitely um, cavalier in their actions for sure, and
Cavalier is a good way to put it.
over the time has been, clearly takes the at least opportunist, right? When they have the opportunity to grab land, Israel absolutely has. Um,
Well,
I think it's a far cry though from the ethnic cleansing that a lot of people claim is the end state of Israel. I really don't see that as being a true statement.
well, in practicality, right? If there's been 70 years of war,
Mm-hmm.
and that 70 years of war has resulted in continued gradual diminishing of land for Palestinians, then and still no solution, then effectively like continuing on that trend, it is dissolution of Palestinians as a people, essentially.
Well, it's a dissolution of what semblance of government that they have if that trend continued, right? But I don't think that that's an ethnic cleansing.
Well,
I think there's like absolutely a reality where those people are assimilated into just the Israeli state if it ever reached that far. And I don't
but
advocate
I
for
don't
that,
think people
okay?
want that, right? Like most people don't want that.
I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't advocate for that. So I don't. But I don't think that that's still on the same level of saying that Israel's goal is ethnic cleansing.
Well, it's not that the
Or
goal is
genocide.
ethnic cleansing, it's that that's the foreseeable result. I think at least that's how people see it. That's how I see it, because it's like practically that's what it is over time. Like even if it's not ethnic cleansing, like maybe and maybe really it's irrelevant, but like the people that are in the Israeli government, if they continue to take the actions that they're taking, like even if they're not outwardly calling for ethnic cleansing, the effect is that there is no land for the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And over time that's ethnic destruction, right?
I I don't know. Is it what ethnicity are the Palestinians that like would be destroyed?
Well, that's another thing. Is like there these common arguments that have like when you're saying what is the ethnicity, there has been a like an attack on like the Palestinians as an identity, which then justifies their destruction as a people. And this is something that is common. Like the idea of denying the validity of the identity of somebody is like pretty commonly understood as like part of genocidal activities.
Yeah, I see the point you're making, but I don't know. I just the ethnicity of Palestinians is just like mixed Arab, basically, right? And it's not like there aren't Arabs in Israel. It's not like Israel has, some horrible stance against Arabs or horrible treatment of Arabs. There is, absolutely history of some discrimination that's happened against non-Jewish Arabs and things like that in Israel.
Yeah,
but
and even within
there's
different groups
right.
within Israel. I
But
mean,
there's still
Sephardic, Ashkenazi. Yeah,
a significant number of Arabs living. What is it, like 20% of Israel's Arab?
but
And
are they
then,
Sephardic like Muslims?
I think non-Jewish Arabs, and then
Okay.
of the Jews that live in Israel, I think like more than Ashkenazi are Mizrahi or whatever they're called. It's like North African, Middle Eastern Jews.
Oh, yeah.
So I that's why I just don't buy like
Well,
the idea that Israel's out to destroy the Palestinian people or kill people, kill as many Palestinians as possible. I was just saying that, you know, Europeans don't make up most of Israel. Most of Israel is Arab, frankly.
so
And that's why I don't buy the ethnic cleansing.
so maybe it's not
Arguments.
ethnic cleansing, but let's get away from the ethnic cleansing. The destruction, it's the inability of the Palestinian people to govern themselves in an effective way.
Yeah, which, is absolutely a result of British and Israeli actions.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that situation is totally helped created by the Israelis.
Yeah, and there is the thing. A lot of people who are into this stuff have heard about when there were what are they called? There were like multiple groups that the that the British had promised, like three different groups that the British had promised the area to, right? And then,
Yeah, and they only really consulted
they gave it
Israel.
to the
Yeah,
Israelis,
right.
essentially.
Well, they only consulted them about how Palestine should be um, run, I believe, and partitioned and all that.
Yeah,
I don't claim to be much of a academic or historian.
right, and that's okay if you don't know
There's
everything.
a lot of, I mean, it's a rich history. My stance is mainly based on the logical ethics of if Israel was dissolved, it would certainly mean um, more or less a second Holocaust, either the death or exodus of almost every Jew in the area.
Yeah, so it's basically, again, practically functionally impossible for that to happen without some sort of something that would effectively be called genocide, right?
Right.
Like that's where I think we're at. You guys like the video, please? I would appreciate that. Um, but again, so what then is happening right now to the Palestinians, right? Like what about the other
Yeah.
side of this? So let's like go back just a little bit.
Well, it's not even just their side. I think there is a mirror of conditions, really. Why don't you continue what you were saying before I?
What was I saying? Oh, I was
Speaking about the Palestinian side of things and what they're going through.
Oh, well, okay. So let's just get on to that then. How long have we been up for? It says I've been up for 27 minutes, but that recording only says 17 minutes. And why is that? Maybe I didn't have it. I think they should open the borders of Israel. They're not multicultural enough from the comments. Yeah, but that's one of these arguments, right? It's like, why does Israel get to have an ethno state? You know, I don't necessarily want an ethno state, but some people do. Especially, I mean, some of my listeners are ethno nationalists.
Yeah.
I assume from some of the stuff. I haven't had anyone explicitly tell me they are, but
Well,
I have to assume.
Why do you think there shouldn't be a Jewish ethno state?
Well, okay, so I don't think there shouldn't be, but what I'm saying is, why is it's like, oops, it's this argument of like why do the Israelis get an ethno state? We want an ethno state.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like,
But what an ethno state of what ethnicity? Like
well,
who? Like who?
a white ethno state is the implication, I think, in this case, but it could be for anything. Or it could be it doesn't even have to be an ethno state. It can be some sort of other.
Okay. It's kind of a weird stance to take this situation from, because why don't
This is
we
what I was
get
talking
that
about with
is
Engels.
is like it's I don't know, but do you have the resources and backing to make that happen for yourself? If not, that's why, realistically.
And I think that's ultimately like what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
It really comes down to like the reason Israel exists and the reason that Palestine can't do anything is that they lost wars.
Rather than asking why doesn't group XYZ have an ethno state or deserve an ethno state, I think it's important to acknowledge that Jews do need an ethno state. That historically it has been shown time and time again that all variety of groups are willing to turn on Jews in the flash of, just like that.
Yeah.
And for the record, I don't think the existence of Israel should be about creating a nation which is more favorable to Jews than other religions or ethnicities. It's just about having a state which always serves as a place of refuge for Jews in the event that something like the Holocaust ever happens again.
Obviously, like, there's a long history of the Jews getting kicked out of a bunch of different places, right? But they were also minorities in a bunch of different places.
Mm-hmm.
So of course there's going to be examples of this. There's also examples of hundreds of years of good times, great oldies, like Jewish people being very successful in a lot of different places.
Yeah, in some places.
Right, but like in a lot of places, right? Like, because it's a diaspora population that goes everywhere. And there's long, like, very successful people in like a lot of places that they go to. So I just I don't like the idea that there's this concept that relates. Like I just want it to be presented uh like across the board, like normal, because the Irish potato famine was a genocide. Like
Hmm.
it was a genocide. Like some people disagree with that, but the Irish potato famine, it's a imperial population. They're owned by the British. The British are diverting food resources, and then millions of people die. Population doesn't recover to the same levels for 90 years. Depopulation is used for more settler colonialism to replace the native population. But from there, if we're all following the argument, and like, look, maybe you're cool with like an ethno state, and America is something different, but like as far as the Irish goes, like the Irish are not allowed to have the argument, and this isn't necessarily against you, but it's like, even though the Irish have suffered a genocide, they're not allowed to be like, hey, we're not going to take in other ethnicities, other religions than Protestant and Catholic. Like they're not allowed to do that, right? They're not
Yeah.
allowed. Like,
Well, that's not what Israel's about either.
what is it? What do you mean? It's not. What's it not
Israel
about?
takes in lots of different ethnicities and religions. It's a country for, yeah, it doesn't, like I said, it's not about discriminating against,
But
uh,
practicality again. Like practicality again.
but
There.
practicality shows that there's lots of different religions and ethnicities in Israel. There's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of Muslims.
But it's
It's only
heavy.
75% Jewish.
It's right, but
Half
the
those Jews are Arab,
right,
and
but
half are European.
75% Jewish, right? And then, but the numbers are not necessarily going down. Like the numbers of Jewish people aren't going down over time in relation to the rest of the population. Like there isn't a like there is in other places, there isn't like a diminishing population level. There isn't like the way that it's trending is not going to like make like Lebanon. Like Lebanon was a population that was made as a Christian country, and
Hmm.
now because of birth rates over 3 generations and people running away and terrorism, you then have the Muslims outpacing the Christians, and now Lebanon, like Christians are fleeing. It's not safe for them anymore.
Okay.
And like, so yes, you're saying this thing about letting everyone in, but then but then the obvious question is like, okay, if like Palestinians are essentially being ruled over by the Israelis, which is effectively what it is, because they're the ones who actually are in control of the territory from a monopoly of violence perspective, then why are they still there? Like, why aren't all those Palestinians given a vote in Israel?
Because they're a different nation. What do you mean? I don't know how to
Well,
really
yeah, but
answer
that's the
that.
point. They're a different nation, but they don't have like that. They are functionally a different nation, but they're not actually like treated that way. They're not like there isn't a there's a ton of meddling from Israel. There's the West Bank, like Palestinian land continues to be taken all the time. You know about settler communities, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, the function of those over time is to me to depopulate the area, right, and replace it with a more amenable population. And like, yeah, we can bring up minority populations of different types of Arabs, Christians, Muslims, but at the same time, it's there's always minority population. Like we have them in the U.S., but that's not an argument against a lack of discrimination against Black people or Hispanics just because they're 12, 15, 20% of the population.
Well, I mean, I acknowledge that Israel is, actively working to grab land, influence, and power from its, neighbor country, Palestine, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see how that necessarily points to anything which shows that Israel is actively trying to suppress all populations besides their one. It seems more of a territorial dispute to me than an ethnic or religious one. I was saying this seems like more of that the whole settler thing and the Israeli occupation of increasing settlement is seems more of a territorial dispute and an opposition to the elected forces of Palestine, which clearly want to see Israel destroyed more or less. And you're saying there is something ethnic in the nature of that dispute.
Well, it's
Unless that's what I believe you were saying.
no, yeah, it's they're one. I don't recognize them as necessarily different. Like just because it's a territorial dispute doesn't mean that it's not an ethnic dispute or a religious dispute or vice versa. They're generally one and the same.
No, there's a big difference between the two, I think.
Why? Like in what way?
Like the exact reason that from an Israeli point of view, okay, because I'm not going to speak to any sort of absolute truth about the conflict because I acknowledge that there's no black and white to this, okay?
Right.
Um,
Keep going.
From the Israeli truth or point of view, right? The neighboring nation, the surrounding nation to you, has elected groups into power which actively seek the destruction of Israel by their doctrinal stance, their defined outlook is that. So every bit of land, all the people you can have under your government as opposed to Hamas or the PLO is more power taken away from terrorists, in quotation marks, just not gonna. Yeah. More power taken away from those groups so that you can better secure your own state.
Okay. So
and that is inherently different to we want our ethnicity to be in these lands. We want our religion to be in these lands. One of them has to do with the continued existence of Israel and its supposed defense. And the other one is Nazism.
Well, okay. When I see...
And again, for the record, I oppose further Israeli settlement into the West Bank and a lot of the actions happening in Gaza, okay?
Yeah, so you oppose... And specifically what in Gaza?
Currently, I would say the carelessness of human life that has clearly been displayed by Israel.
Yeah.
That's undeniable.
Okay, so again, it comes down to practicality for me. Like it very much is a practicality thing, and practically what I see is that over time the land is being taken. Like that is what's happening. Regardless
undeniably.
of like right, so Israel might not be saying outwardly, Israel is not in their doctrine stating we aim to make our people over the other people that live here. Like we aim to continue. Like as far as I'm concerned, they might as well be saying the same thing as what Hamas is doing. Maybe not the same, but
I totally disagree.
The difference is my perception as what I perceive to be okay. Like what I perceive as value. So it's not a difference that's like innate or anything. But Israel is like over time that is what's happening. Even if they're not saying that this is what we want to happen, it's what they're doing. So it doesn't matter if they say it or not. It's the actions, and that's what the actions are. Like you can paint like a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I don't agree that that's what's happening. I mean, the land grab is absolutely happening.
Right.
But the
land grab represents displacement of those people who have the land. So that's what. So what isn't happening then? A replacement of the Palestinian people, because that's, I mean, the land is being taken over time. So the population.
I guess motive is the thing I'm disagreeing with here, but it doesn't really end up mattering that much.
Right. But that's my point, is that functionally the motive, and number one, I think that the stated motive is maybe different than the actual motive. So when they're saying that there is a motive that's one thing, that doesn't mean that that's actually what the motive is. The motive could be anything. They'll always lie. I mean, when I say they, I mean any government in history.
Yeah, of course.
But it's so terrorists as well. Like we use this word terrorist.
Well, again, when I said that word, I can't see on camera, but I even gave the quotation marks.
You did do that. Yeah, I've seen it.
I'm not again, that everything I just said was proposed from an Israeli point of view, and I don't think that it represents necessarily reality, but I also don't think that it goes so far as to say that they are the same as what Hamas would have done if the power dynamic was reversed and things like that. Okay.
Jeez. Sorry, keep going.
I understand that displacement of those people, absolutely, of Palestinians, has absolutely taken place over time, and that's how this land was acquired, right? I think you can acquire land without without genocide being a byproduct of it, if that makes sense. I mean,
Well,
it happens all the time.
does it though?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Give me one example, because I don't know what you're talking about. It's extremely weird how you need laws in Europe to basically protect the Holocaust as an actual event that happened. There's not other law like that for any other event.
Well, I think the Holocaust is just one of those moments where collectively, as a human civilization, we are like, let's not forget this lesson. And that's why a lot of cultures, not cultures, a lot of countries have anti-Holocaust denial laws.
Yeah, but there's lots of other events, right? There's lots of other events.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
I think I think there's more to it than that. I really do.
Why?
Because the point is that different groups advocate for themselves. So Jewish groups wanting to advocate for the Holocaust as a more common area of study are going to push for that specifically. Like that's just a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah. But then why don't groups that advocate for those other events do the same thing in those countries?
Well, they do, but they have less. Like there are more. It's not like we were talking about this earlier. It's like there are more Jews with a significant amount of power.
How many Jews in Germany were there with significant power when that legislation was pushed through, that Holocaust denial was made illegal?
Oh, a lot.
How many? When was this?
I mean, it was basically the reconstruction of Germany post World War II.
Right.
Part of it was the Bolsheviks. The other part of it is like a lot of global elements.
I find it hard to believe Jews were managing, like, controlling the media and working from places of high power right after the Holocaust in Germany.
Well, it wasn't German command. It was internationally occupied. So absolutely they were, but they weren't Germans.
Well,
I mean, some of them were.
The
But
legislation is
the legislation
in place now, and they're not occupied by anybody.
Yeah, but there was a cultural shift in what was pushed in.
And how many Canadian Jews were there that made that legislation pulled into place?
There were probably a bunch. There were probably a bunch, but that's not specifically what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about the amount of like scholarly influence about the Holocaust. That's not what I want to get into. I want to keep reading these comments.
Okay.
If you want to keep
that
talking
was
about
a comment. That's why it was brought up.
They're called memory law. There are none in Spain for Holocaust, but it's forbidden to deny the Civil War. See, yeah, deny the Civil War. That's interesting because that's a cultural one, right? Like in a lot of countries, it's illegal to deny.
Do you think there's any level of censorship that's okay?
I mean, there has to be, like, a threat could be like you could say to somebody like, "I'm going to go to where you are," and I'm going to harm
not
you.
a call to action or violence or anything.
Well, but that's already right. Okay.
I didn't ask that question with an end game in mind, by the way. It's just
What was the question?
genuine question. Do you think that there is like necessary censorship? Is there censorship you don't oppose? Well, there's like, I mean, even like the Hamas protests, a lot of them were shut down. That's a form of censorship.
Yeah. And I don't like the problem that I have is that, and this goes into like when you're talking about the Holocaust as well. I don't like when an event like is you're not allowed to talk about it in a certain way, like anything. And I don't like an event being singled out and saying that this is like the thing that you can't talk about, because when you put something up on a pedestal like that, when you put something like at such a high level that it's sacred, you're not allowed to talk about it. But it's that thing. It's not like anything of this particular nature. Like, for example, you can deny, and people often do, just because it was a famine. You can pass it off as a famine, but there was a genocide in Ireland. It was a very effective
Yeah, and
genocide.
if people say that it never happened, doesn't that
Well, people say that it wasn't a genocide,
right?
but and that's I mean that's genocide denial, right?
Right.
But in a lot of places, that's not illegal.
Yeah.
It's only illegal to deny the Holocaust.
Okay. But would
So,
it be a
but
bad thing if you couldn't deny the fact that the potato famine was a genocide?
I mean, I think that you should be able to deny whatever you want, like the Earth is flat, like
Yeah.
that type of thing.
In the same light, I think cultures can decide that something was so damaging to their own culture that there should be laws against basically not learning from that lesson of history.
But whenever you pick a specific event, whenever you pick one specific event, the reason that that event gets picked over others is for whoever that's most important to. Like there isn't necessarily like it's like how do you what's worse, the transatlantic slave trade or the Holocaust or the Irish potato famine or the Bangladeshi famine of the 1940s
Yeah.
or the Boer War concentration camps that the English did. Like why when you're picking out that one event, that event is being picked out like it's being picked out by individuals for socially constructed reasons. It's not like it just comes out of nowhere. It's not like it drops out of the zeitgeist and that's the event that you're choosing, right? It has to be chosen by somebody, and it's chosen by somebody like with more power. And when it's going to be in a situation where it's more relevant to your culture, or when I say culture, I'm talking about like the way that you pick social constructs, what you're studying, things like that, then like if it's more important to a certain group of people, then that is going to be more prominent, or that group of people exercises a lot of soft power. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm talking about like the difference in America of the subpopulation of Asian people versus the subpopulation of Black Americans. Like you have Black Americans who exercise an incredible amount of soft power in the culture, in sports, music, things like that. But they're not, and they're able to affect culture that way, even though they are disproportionately not in certain other positions of power and historically have been even more so discluded.
Okay. I guess my question to you is what is the harm in Holocaust denial legislation? Legislation.
I don't believe in any sort of censorship like that, any of it. So it's not like it's, you know, I can answer that. Any answer I give you is going to be about it being an event rather than anything else. Like nothing specific about Holocaust denial. It's just that I don't think that it makes sense to pick out a specific, like in a specific event for being banned.
Well, I think also it might have to do with just our proximity to it. Like, sure, a lot of more horrible things have happened, but I mean, I wouldn't even say more horrible, right? But other horrible things have happened. But it's relatively recent, right? And
I mean, there's more recent genocides.
sure,
There's a lot more. The relevance thing is true, but like again, we live in New England. A lot more Irish people than there are Jewish people,
yeah,
and a lot of us are here because of the famine, because of the
sure.
genocide, and we don't
A lot of
have
Jews
the.
are here because of the Holocaust.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but I
but
don't think there's anything wrong with saying if Ireland was like this was a formative time where somebody tried to kill off our people, we are not going to allow this segment of history to be ignored in our
but when
country.
it's but denial of it means that you're not allowed to have certain. You're not like when you're denying it, somebody has to decide what denying it means, which
Yeah,
means that they're allowed to create a specific narrative of it, and you're not allowed to talk about specific aspects. Like, I
mhm,
don't think it's good to deny that it was a genocide.
yeah,
The Irish potato famine was definitely a genocide. It was effective settler colonialism that paved the way for further conquering of the native Catholic population by Scots and English Protestants. But that's like if they were to decide this is the dogma, then it no longer becomes it becomes something that is a political truth rather than just organic truth.
Yeah, I just think your skepticism can be applied to all laws and all enforcement of them. Like, well, you're going to have police. Well, someone's going to have to enforce those laws, and their bias is going to be the one that dictates how it's enforced. And you're not wrong, but that doesn't mean we can't have laws that are made in good faith to, learn from history and make sure that those lessons aren't lost to time.
So we're talking about this in America. We now have this situation where we have populations of people living together who kind of want to kill each other.
Yeah, I think America is where it's actually going the best, frankly.
What do you mean?
Like we're still managing it pretty well. Like infighting is not really that
Yeah, there
bad
hasn't
here.
been a lot of actual violence.
Right. France is like an example of. It's been some pretty crazy attacks that have happened in France
They've been getting like overrun and
over
haven't
the
they?
last few decades, realistically, last couple decades.
But here,
right.
like we have people living in a population, like we have Muslims and Jews, and then their specific supporters for whatever reason. And there's a bunch of different reasons why somebody would support one side over the other. Did everybody just jump off at the same time? It's weird. It just went down from 5 to 2 people, but that's okay. If you're one of those 2 people still hanging out, or if that was a glitch, then welcome. Now it's at 4. Weird. What the is our country even if there are people within the borders who have like deathly issues with each other? Although I guess practicality again, they're not really deathly issues because there hasn't been a lot of actual violence. But the idea that like at colleges, there's Jewish students and Muslim students, there's Palestinian students and some Israeli students, and they're at deadly odds with each other, essentially. Like some of them have family that's fighting and killing each other.
Yeah.
And they exist in the same country. And now they have their own opposed to each other, other identities within the country. And I mean, that's not a good thing. I just don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think what the U.S. has done really well for a while is, and this is something I feel, I might be a Jew, right? So I feel some kind of kinship to Israel.
Right.
But I'm an American first and foremost.
Yeah, me too. And I feel the Irish thing is like, it's looser because like I feel a lot for Ireland.
Yeah.
Like a lot for Ireland. But ultimately that's a fraction compared to the American identity. Like right. I'm American of Irish descent. I'm not Irish.
Right. So I think that for a long time, we've had a strong national identity. And it is kind of blended those borders a lot, like very effectively, like you can have Jew and an Irishman and an Arab all at the bar, all walk into the bar, blah, blah, blah. It happens all the time. We all share spaces with any number of different kinds of religions, ethnicities, nationalities, ex-nationalities, whatever. That's something that kind of worries me about the recent trend in my lifetime of like my generation kind of being very I don't know, I don't want to say anti-America.
Yeah.
Right? But you know what I mean.
No, I mean, yeah, definitely. There's a shift in it. And I taught ish. Like I got my teaching degree and I got certified to teach and I did my student teaching. And the relevant, like the content that they're teaching about right now is like, oh my gosh, it's dark outside. The content they're teaching about is like
9:00.
Like they don't do assimilation anymore. When our grandparents were around, like they did heavy assimilation. They assimilated you. Like different types of, mostly whites at that point. Like I'm talking about like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, beginning of like universal high school. Everybody got assimilated. You spoke English. They attacked. They did attack. They specifically subdued a lot of subpopulations, namely the Germans and the Japanese in World War II. But the Germans, that had already happened in World War I, and it was very complete in World War I. There used to be a German-American culture, and that's heavily gone now, not as a result of World War II, but World War I. And then it was really destroyed in World War II. But there isn't an emphasis on assimilation anymore. It's an emphasis on people being allowed to have their own identities.
Yeah, everyone's an individual.
Right. Everyone's an individual and you have these identities and that's your lived experience and all that. And that's fine. It's fine, but also
But also, it's not that fine.
it's not that fine.
Yeah.
It's not fine.
Also, it has bred an excessive amount of racial tension
Yeah.
and political tension in my lifetime. I mean, you know, I can't remember too far before, into the past. I'm only 20 something years old here, but God, have people ever really been at their throats this much in our country for not ever, but like at least in recent times, in the post, I don't know,
The
Cold War forward at least.
No, not Cold War forward.
Right.
No, the 60s was bad.
Sure.
And people don't talk about how bad the 60s was, but the 60s was bad. That was some bad stuff, man. They were gnarly in the 60s. There was a lot of violence that doesn't get talked about.
Yeah.
In the 60s, but no, it has not happened since then. But it's been like, it feels like, and there's evidence for this, but it feels like it's been done on purpose. And I'm not saying by like, it's probably decentralized within a bunch of different groups of people, but whatever has happened, it's been done on purpose. And the production, the pushing and education of, like, it should be obvious when people read this stuff. I should actually go into some of the actual literature on it, because culturally relevant pedagogy is curriculum that is culturally relevant to not your American identity, but to any other identity that you have, any other subdivision that you have. And if you're going to teach to that, and they don't even like teach English in the same way, they don't like, you can just go to an American public school and be speaking Spanish or some other language every day, and that's fine. And that's considered fine. And like, I don't think we should be intolerant of other languages or other cultures, but I don't think that it makes sense to be living in a country where you're not assimilating people into a common way of thinking and a common identity. If you're not doing that, then what's the point of being an American? At that point, the country doesn't have an identity. And at that point, like, why am I living next to somebody and living in a community with people who have a very different identity than me, which most importantly on that is that they have a very different way of viewing the world. Like,
Yeah.
I want to live around people that agree with me, and instead we're just a mess of different identities, of ethnic, racial, religious, all these different ones that are at odds with each other.
Yeah, and that kind of ties back into the whole reason we kind of started off on this tangent, right? Is you had a day of rage announced by a terrorist organization, frankly. I think absolutely Palestinian resistance, excluding Hamas, can be categorized as resistance, but
But remember, Hamas, partly funded by Israel.
well, whether they're funded or not, they're absolutely a creation of Israel. Okay.
Yeah, but specifically funded by Israel.
I know, to right. In response to PLO,
But like, come on.
But still, that doesn't make it not a terrorist organization.
Yeah, but it does.
Like the U.S. served its hand in a lot of terrorist organizations. That doesn't mean
and the U.S. gets the blame. Is what I'm saying.
But that doesn't mean when you blow up a mosque with a suicide vest that you're not a terrorist.
No.
So when you walk into a music festival and shoot up 250 people, I don't care that you were funded by the government that you're attacking. You're a terrorist.
Yeah, absolutely, they're terrorists.
So,
right? But
that's why I address Hamas as a terrorist organization. I think that's valid.
But yeah, I'm not saying they're not.
So then
I'm not disagreeing with that.
So then, just where I was going with that.
Oh, okay.
Is a terrorist organization declared a day of rage, a global day of rage for Muslims. Thousands of people in every country. That should raise some red flags for a nation.
Yeah.
When you have thousands of people in your street chanting in Arabic and you're French or German, whatever. And it's in response to a call to action by a terrorist organization. And the unifying flag for all of them is Islam, right? Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
So
that should concern you if you're a non-Muslim, because it means that there's countrymen which have a stronger banner than the one that you're under.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Okay, but the flip side of that, all the Jewish Americans like Ben Shapiro who are calling and supporting Israel so much. And yeah, we can say, okay, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but the distinction of them being terrorists has to do with the way that they conduct their military, or the way that they conduct their military and like killing operations, whatever you want to call them. And like that is a result of their like international recognition and of their technological level. That's not like a result. Like if they could have a professional military, they would. So yeah, Israel has a professional military. The U.S. has a professional military. So does France. It doesn't stop the U.S., the U.K., Israel, and France. I'm thinking of these specifically, but there's many other countries from instigating coups all over the world. The U.S. all over South America, and Latin America, Central America, France and Africa. I think like dozens of coups. Libya, joint French, U.S., U.K., all these different places. Like, yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but like, I'm not sure that I would call what the U.S. did in Iraq as morally superior to terrorism.
I would.
Okay, why though?
Because I don't think that the U.S. set out into Iraq with the goal of racking up as many innocent bodies as possible. Now,
But does that matter?
yes, absolutely. Did casualties happen, and a lot of them? Yeah. And do we bear the responsibility for that? 100%. There's a difference between civilian casualties, which are a result of war, and they happen in every war, and intentionally killing non-combatants.
I don't think there is.
There absolutely is.
I don't think so, because it's a difference of like of the reason why you accept civilian casualties. Because when Americans go to war, when the West goes to war, they know they're going to kill civilians. They're not accidental deaths. Collateral deaths are not accidental. They're deaths that they know are going to happen and that are accepted. So the US, France, UK, every Western country, Turkey, Russia, even more than the West, when they go on missions and they assassinate people, they know they're going to kill civilians. Just because that's not their stated goal does not mean that's what's going to happen. When these wars are started, they know civilians are going to die, they do the stuff anyway. And then we find out that there's all these ulterior motives, Dick Cheney and his companies, and this stuff goes to court and it becomes a real thing. And then there's, people being tortured in Guantanamo Bay, and some of them weren't even really terrorists. Oops. But like, look, you can say it matters. It's a difference. I don't think it's a difference. I don't see a difference, because it's like at that point, what you're doing is you're justifying what civilian deaths are okay and what aren't.
So let me ask you something. What should Israel's response to the attack have been?
I mean, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that what they did was okay or acceptable. Here's another question. What should Hamas or Palestinians do in response to the last 3 generations of their country, of the conflict?
Probably not kill a bunch of people at a music festival.
I mean, yeah, but Israel probably shouldn't have just started firing missiles into Palestine, into the Gaza Strip.
Gaza's been firing missiles into Israel for the longest time,
and that's also wrong. But
yeah,
it doesn't.
I know, but I'm not.
Again, this is justifying. It's all just justifying civilian deaths.
No, I'm not justifying civilian deaths.
I'm not saying you are, but that's implicit in what we're talking about.
The reason I asked the question of what should Israel's response have been to the attack is because if someone is fighting like Hamas is, what is the response? You do nothing and allow 1,400 people of your,
no, look, I'm not even judging what Israel did. I'm just saying that, like, what it actually is. Again, my question in response again is like, if you're Hamas, if you're the Palestinians, if you 4 generations ago, 100 years ago, this was all your land for your people, and now it's shrinking every day, and you're living in like cramped conditions in one of the poorest places in the world, what are you supposed to do? I get it. Obviously, murdering a bunch of people at a music festival is obviously not the answer, but neither is firing rockets into Gaza. So it's like it's so what I'm seriously asking, it's not facetious. What is Palestine supposed to do?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what Israel's supposed to do.
Right. But
But
that's
I
the
do
point.
see a difference between we're targeting Hamas and civilian casualties result from our strikes. We maybe try our best. Even that's giving them too much credit, right? But
Yeah.
but make efforts at least to limit civilian casualties, as opposed to let's kill as many civilians as we can in this attack. Huge difference, massive difference.
Practically the difference is that Palestinian civilian casualties are 10x Israelis at least. I mean, we can look it up. I don't know what it is, but the thing is, a lot more Palestinians get killed than Israelis do.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was true even during the 6 Day War. I mean, but that doesn't mean that they're. That means nothing other than you've been doing war worse. I mean, you have less resources.
Okay.
That's what that points
So yeah,
to,
so they've just been doing war worse. That's the distinction. The distinction is not a moral distinction. The distinction is that they're worse at war.
When you're talking about why people are dying, there's a distinction
Well,
between we were targeting Hamas and they hide in residential buildings, and we tried our best to. I know, tried our best even is like. I
don't like.
And
oh, we tried our best. Sorry, your whole family died. That doesn't mean anything.
No,
it doesn't matter.
It shouldn't mean anything to Palestinians.
Right.
It doesn't. Why would it?
It doesn't mean anything to me, though.
It should.
Why? Like, why? What's the distinction?
Because one's collateral damage and the other is.
And what is collateral damage?
Borderline evil,
What is collateral? Why is collateral damage not evil? To me, collateral damage is extraordinarily evil. Because collateral damage is the understanding that you're going to kill civilians. It's not based on rage or evil or righteousness. It's based on a cold, calculated understanding that these people's lives cost less than our goal of what we're doing here.
I don't understand, though, how you can... I mean, so everyone's evil for every war that's ever been fought, even if you're defending yourself? Because
no, I'm not putting a value judgment like that.
There's never been a war fought where people didn't have civilian casualties.
Yes. No, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that yes.
Arguably, civilians are always the greatest casualty of war.
Usually, yeah. They almost always are.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. That it's just that they're worse at war. That's the only distinction. They do the war different. They have different technological levels. I don't view collateral damage as better. I just don't. It's like, that's the point. It's everybody's done war differently all of history, but that doesn't mean that, like, again, it is implicitly a justification of civilian deaths, because you just said it. You just said collateral is different. Collateral is not as bad as this motivational, like being motivated by this stated reason. But like, they can afford, like Israel, the United States, they can afford to be cold and calculated because they're in the position of authority. Prior to the 6 Day War, prior to the 60s, like, there was plenty of Israeli terrorist groups. There was plenty of Zionist terrorist groups. That helped build Israel. It helped build South Africa. It helped build the United States.
Speaking to that violence, and like I said, even the settler violence is whatever happens to you there, you get what's coming to you.
Well, but okay. So I've seen some of this, like, even then, I don't even feel that, like, so I would say this in any situation, but like, some of those settler communities were attacked and some of those people were killed. Like, you could say innocent people, like some of them are children, unfortunately. I don't like that. Like, even if they're in the settler communities, they're more directly impacting being a part of this, but like, they're still just a part of the system. That there were settlers being sent, like poor whites were being sent farther west. Like, yes, this happened in Texas, and that's famous. Joe Rogan keeps talking about it, but it was even happening like in the Appalachian Mountains. They were like, send the poor whites out there, and they can deal with the Indians. They can, like, savage it down.
I think there's a clear difference between something like the Cambodian genocide and how many Germans were killed during the siege of Berlin. I think there's a massive difference between those two things.
What's the difference?
Intent and outcome also.
Okay, but
because what
is collateral damage, though?
What do you mean? What is
collateral damage?
I mean, collateral damage.
Define collateral damage.
It's in this case, the casualties that are resulting from actions that were intended for other purposes. Right. The goal was not to cause damage to those people or those objects or whatever.
But they're accepted. Collateral isn't accidental, it's accepted. So absolutely they did intend on killing civilian populations, because if you calculate an action, I'm going to drop a bomb here to hit this target, we calculate that there's going to be, because they calculate, I don't know if they did back then, but today in the US military, they calculate, there's a number, there's a point system, dude, of like how many,
I get
like
that.
how
I
high,
understand.
listen, let me finish. How high value of a target is, they'll say, okay, we can kill this many innocent people for it. That is intending on killing innocent people. It's absolutely accepting. It's done through a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic method. That doesn't make it better.
I don't know I don't know how to argue with you that like willing genocide is different than military action that results in people getting
I'm not
hurt.
saying they're not different, but the difference, what is the difference?
The difference is intent and outcome. The difference is that if I was Israel, okay, if I was the sole commander of Israel right now, okay, and I could have my way, not even saying that this is their intent, okay, I would be able to strike at Gaza, kill nothing but known Hamas terrorists, and no civilians, non-combatants were hurt in the process. That's the difference. If I was a Hamas commander and I had my way, what would happen? The Jewish power would just be dissolved and I would let all the Jews live peacefully amongst us?
I think that you're wrong to assume that there aren't people in that population that that don't want to kill civilians.
I didn't say that.
Right.
I never said that. In fact, I acknowledged multiple times that those people do exist.
So ultimately for me,
And if that's what's happening, then sure, those people are terrorists.
well, okay.
If they're driving the
What it comes down to for me is that when we're Americans, right? Like we have a specific understanding of what is acceptable in war. And you're stating it right now.
Yeah.
You're stating the cultural acceptability, like why this is how we view, but that's because that's how we do war. That's how we do war.
Uh-huh.
So it makes sense. Excuse me. It makes sense for us to follow. It makes sense for us to follow and to promote the rules of war that we have in our culture, because those are the rules of war that benefit us the most.
Well, it's international rules of war as
Is
well.
international rules of war from a Western authority.
Sure.
Right? So these are created. It's not like in the American Revolutionary War, they were using guerrilla tactics largely learned from Native Americans. They also brought in Prussian and French and Spanish military advisors and French naval advisors and Spanish naval advisors. So, but they didn't all fight by the rules of war of Europe. And then the Europeans are looking down on the Americans for this. But at the same time, there's no incentive for the Americans to fight clean if that means losing.
No, but there's also no incentive for those Americans to go to Britain and kill and rape British civilians there, was there?
No.
Right. So, because why would that help their cause at all?
What's your point? What's the point?
My point is that you're not talking about the difference in war fighting tactics, because, or rather, you are talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. Being a Hamas terrorist is not I'm fighting a war differently by targeting civilians. How is that fighting a war differently? What are you achieving by doing that? Jihad. I mean, frankly.
Well, they're achieving a few things. I think that number one of the things that's positive from this is that I think that people like right now, some of those settler populations, those settlers, those populations are made up of a lot of like Europeans and Americans and Canadians, right? So you get a guy from New Jersey who knows he's protected by the government, and I've seen the videos online of a guy with a New Jersey accent walking into some family's home in the West Bank and being like, "This is my house now. I didn't do this to you. Like, you. Like, I didn't do this to you. I'm sorry. I didn't do it." Doesn't say I'm sorry. Like, I didn't do this to you. They take it up with them. Okay, that guy and maybe more people like it are going to think twice about going to Israel when they see these horrifying pictures.
I just told you whatever happens to those they get what's coming at
Well,
them.
yeah, but that's the point. But I'm telling you that there is a functional purpose to Hamas doing terror like that. Like that's why terrorism happens because it works.
I don't think that's why Hamas commits terrorist acts. I find that hard to believe.
I mean,
A tactic to prevent people from settling in the West Bank. I don't know
they
about that.
want to stop people
I
from
think that's a
settling on
great.
Palestinian
I think it's
lands.
a great way to get the IDF to send more people to the West Bank.
I mean, and then have the world response of the result of that. Like you know how that's going to be.
That's what's happening now.
Whether or not it's a good idea doesn't mean that there aren't like benefits to their side from what they're doing.
I just don't think that it's like it goes that deep. I think the reason you would do a suicide attack is because of religious fundamentalism that rewards you for doing so. And like a lot of terrorism boils down to something that's that simple. Like you're not suicide bombing a mosque because this will help push our advantage in terms of like they'll think twice about what these people are doing.
I don't think either of us should really assume what they're doing. And there's also like a bunch of different people, right? Like they're not a monolith.
No, they're not.
And the people like at the top of Hamas, just like the people at the top of any other military or group, are going to be incredibly smart people.
Even if it was a strategy, though, I mean that still doesn't justify.
No, it doesn't justify it. No, it doesn't justify it at all. But that's what I'm saying. But neither does it being collateral damage justify the civilian casualties.
I'm not. Listen, justification. First of all, there's two problems with that word. One is that nothing justifies, in a moral sense, any violent conflict. Okay, if you really want to boil it down to the most absolutist, like, ethical quandary, right? The second is that your sense and my sense of justification in a war is meaningless.
Right. Okay. But my only point here, and we've been talking about this for too long, but my only point here is that there are cultural ideas about how to conduct war, and that doesn't include just military tactics. It also includes what's acceptable.
Well, I have the right to think that my culture is more right about this.
And that's fine. But that's all I'm saying is that it is a cultural justification.
It's fine.
It's not inherently better. That's it.
There's nothing.
Well, then we're not disagreeing.
There's nothing objective about anything, like in terms of ethics.
Sure. That's fine. But that's why it's not obvious whose side it's on or whose side is the right one. There isn't a right side because it's all decided by what different values people have.
The fact of the matter is that Israel and Hamas have Israel and Palestine, because it's not just about PLO also. They've created each other. They've helped push each other to this point.
Sure did.
Yeah, and it's at this point, it's just what kind of people do you think Israel will elect after an attack like October 7th?
Let's see. Probably somebody that's not going to help them in the international scene, not going to help them win favor, and maybe that's another thing. Hamas understands that if they
and who do you think the Palestinians are going to be vouching for after that Israel is doing in Gaza?
Yeah,
probably real Hamas-like people.
I don't know if you remember, but there were a few months ago. There was some stuff that happened that probably resulted in this in Gaza, where there were some specific attacks where Israeli troops were going in and like taking people. I don't remember the specifics of it. I did cover it at the time.
I have a strong skepticism of anything that comes out of that region right now. Just all the information.
This was months ago, but still. But like it was, I mean, there was videos and stuff, and there was.
I know, but even now, I've seen, man. There's been a lot of. I don't know how much you've been following this. Like, if you've gotten
this,
every little story that's been coming out, like, I'm sure you heard about the babies, the 40 beheaded babies that they found or whatever.
Apparently a fake.
I mean, I haven't seen any beheaded babies, and
the country of Israel got community notes, by the way.
What do you mean?
Like, apparently Israel put out a picture that was staged with like staged blood on it. I don't know if that's true. I don't know.
Again,
like accurate, but that's the thing that I saw.
I don't know because
I saw it. Like I saw the Israeli official Twitter page posting this, and then the community notes was removed. But
yeah, I've also seen like posts from people where it's like, this is the IDF spokesperson. He's saying this and that, and the guy has nothing to do with the IDF. There's been a lot of shit like that. Everything where someone's speaking a language that I don't understand, and I'm just reading subtitles, I cannot take it as.
And that's nobody's speaking English.
No,
except in the American videos and Canadian videos.
Right, and because even as an American, I've heard lots of Donald Trump said that veterans can't handle PTSD war. That's why they get PTSD because they're pussies.
He
and
did
then
kind of say that.
I
Did
know,
say that.
I know,
one. That's
but
a bad example.
when you listen to him, though, you're not getting the impression that that's what he meant. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
He was being his regular dickish self, and they pulled it out. Yeah.
My point is that.
Not that I don't like Trump. I like Trump.
My point is that there's people in this country who can misrepresent views, and if you don't know the tone and the exact words being said, they can absolutely skew what someone is saying, and it's way easier to do if I don't speak Hebrew or Arabic. There's been a lot of confusion, misinformation over what's been attacked, who's died, this and that. I didn't believe the beheaded baby the first time I heard it. I was like, that sounds like a crock of shit.
I don't believe anything.
Recently, I don't know if you had to have heard this. The hospital was hit.
Yeah, and I literally do not know who hit it.
Yeah,
and then I heard it was just the parking lot, and then it was like,
and
somebody was like, "It's a J dam. It has to be Israel." And then somebody was like, "It was a misfire from the Palestinians' dam." I don't know.
It's impossible to find now. The only evidence I can go off of is the actual picture of the blast. Like, you can find a picture in front of the hospital.
That means nothing to me. Yes, I've seen it.
Where the bomb went off.
Yeah.
And that's supposedly the blast that killed 500 people, and it's like a scorch mark on the ground, like some cars got fucked up.
I saw that.
Doesn't look like 500 people.
Unless there's another thing.
Yeah, but it's like, who gives the body counts? The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza, who is directly managed by Hamas. Like,
yeah.
So, I mean, if I was Hamas, I would be pumping up those numbers, because the whole way Israel loses this war is the cultural war, and they're losing that.
Well, people are horrified by some of the stuff. I've been horrified by stuff that I've seen said by, like, for people in positions of power, it's been mostly people on the Israeli side. I've been horrified by a bunch of things that people have said, but, you know, a lot of, like, politicians, commentators, like the way Ben Shapiro has been going off, it's been like, oh my God.
I wouldn't put too much Ben Shapiro, man.
There's a lot of it, though. There's a lot of it. And like, that is,
well, first of all, the U.S. The U.S. has been, obviously, they're, you know, pro-Israel, right? They're our ally. We have to support them. But they've also played the de-escalation game pretty well. Okay? This country's taken a surprisingly calm approach to the situation.
Yeah.
It's thanks to them that Palestinians are going to be getting any aid through Gaza at all.
Some of what I've seen is that this has to do with a support thing. But I don't know. It's like, I've heard so many times that they're trying to get us to go to war with Iran, and then there's just not enough normal population support behind it. And I feel like somebody claimed, and I have no way of, like, saying whether this is true or not, that they did not like that they were surprised at the lack of support, especially amongst the younger generations, for war with Israel, and amongst the troops themselves, of going to war and dying for Israel.
Yeah. I don't know. You'd think the internet would make it so that the correct information is much easier to access, but it turns out that
worse.
Yeah, it's worse.
It's because you can't trust anybody.
No,
especially in a situation like this, you can't trust the Israeli government. You can't trust the PLO.
One of those videos of the hospital strike, you know, was side by side of a JDAM going off in Afghanistan, and then you go, look, this is what it sounds like and looks like. And then there's another video where you can hear, like, basically an identical signature, you know, see an identical explosion. But it's a completely dark video. You have no idea if the building that's hit is even the hospital. You have no idea when this video was taken. You don't know if the sound was put into that video.
Yeah.
Like, there a million things. You know, there's no way to you know, confirm any of the stuff that's being talked about. I saw another one which goes, this is proof that the IDF committed the airstrike. Here's a jet you can see. You can hear and see the jet flying overhead. It's the top of a building being struck 4 times by bombs from a jet. Well, that's not what happened at the hospital. So, like, it's so easy to misinform people because even if what you're presenting can be easily misproven,
Yeah.
if someone's already in that bias, they will take it at face value and
Yeah.
they will regurgitate it to other people.
And then it's also that, like, if the correct information is out there, you just put out a couple fake stories, and then people they don't have the time to sift through the information and
No.
figure out what's real.
No, it's like trying to read terms and conditions of like every goddamn device and software you've ever used. It's like
Information overload, we're screwed.
yeah, it's not happening.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it,
All
to
right.
be honest. We'll end it there. So this is the end of the episode. So if you haven't already, please rate the podcast 5 stars. I would really appreciate it.